unknowns at first, and um, and then all of a sudden toilet paper starts running out, and everyone's freaking out about toilet paper. Then I start freaking out about toilet paper because everyone else is freaking out about toilet paper, and you know, masks are running low, gloves are running low, hand sanitizer is running low. I'm washing my hands like 12 times a day now. And so it definitely caused a little bit of mayhem just because there's so many unknowns at first. And like then people within my community, among family here in Broomfield, actually caught COVID. Their grandmother passed away, but their father was actually the first person in the state of Colorado to be released from COVID-19. Yeah, so that it once it hits your community, kind of the reality of it kind of hits a little harder. Um, and then you start watching the news, and then all of a sudden, like it's hard not to get caught up in it.
I think that we thought it would be a 14-day event and then things would maybe turn back into what we had expected. Our kids came home from school. We had been homeschooling for 3 years, and just this fall, last fall 2019, they went back into a school. Suddenly, then in March, they were told that they'd be doing online school. So it was another adjustment for them. I think the first way that I was trying to deal with it was with a lot of humor and looking at things in just with a lot of, I don't know, I tend to be somewhat sarcastic at times. And I think that I just let that be an outlet for me to kind of take things and find the humor in them.
It's been really hard to not be able to see people in person, to not have meetings in person, because obviously in my work, my line of work, personal connection is very important. And so we've really had to flex with what we do and had to do a lot of experiments with our ministry. And things at home have been probably like a lot of people again. Our 4 kids are teenagers, and so that's been an adventure for all of us to be home and for all of us to be around each other more often than normal. And so there's definitely been some stress and some challenges for all of us. But I feel like we've weathered it okay. Our kids definitely did get really stir crazy, and so after the stay-at-home order, initially it was the stay-at-home order, where just like a lot of other.
In late summer of last year, that was 1918, the paper in Leadville was full of articles that were patriotic about the war, and then there were letters to the editor about prohibition and the upcoming election about that. Of course, Leadville already has prohibition, but there are people that insist on having alcohol. Now, before long, we were reading in the paper about the Spanish flu, and people were getting letters in the mail from friends, and they were talking about how that disease was affecting friends and family in different places. And of course, whoa, do you know that we got a letter, now that I think of it, from my son John's wife over there in Nebraska. And she mentioned the flu, and she also let us know about her oldest boy, who is overseas in the Army. It's always so good to hear about him. He's a wonderful boy. Well, we'd been doing all of that, and we'd been hearing all of that, and we'd been hearing about things that we'd been reading, but there's always small town gossip. And that spreads faster than any newspaper or letter that you could have written. Now, up in Leadville, we'd been having a very healthy summer. I don't mean to diminish any death, it's always a loss, but in July, we only lost 10 people out of our population. And that's less than usual, and it was the same in August and the same in September until September 30th. And that's when we had our first fatality from that Spanish flu. There was a young man that had traveled out to Washington to see a friend of his in the Army camp out that way. And he came back home on the train to Leadville and he died. A week after that, we had 20 cases of the Spanish flu in Leadville, and we had had 5 fatalities from it. By the 3rd week in October, we were losing 8 to 12 people a day from the Spanish flu. People were in a panic. Nobody knew what to do. Everybody was so afraid of that disease moving so quickly.
So I got my sewing machine back out, which actually my sewing machine was very old. I had it most of my life, one of my best friends, and it died.
Oh no.
It was really hard because I can't get it fixed. Too old.
Yeah.
And you cannot buy a sewing machine these days. You can't get one. So a friend of mine lent me hers. And so I taught myself how to use that. And so that has been a kind of an adjustment because it was a lot of learning
Yeah. Yeah.
and adapting to.
My wife and I, of course, we had respite care that would come in once or twice a week, and we'd have date night. Date night was gone.
Yeah.
So, like a lot of people, we were home. So we did a lot of takeout and improvised, shall we say, with movies, with various streaming services, and dealt with it.
I do have some medical knowledge, so that didn't terrify me of that we are in a pandemic. What terrified me more, I think, was more of how do I keep the kids and my husband, the family safe effectively. And so that was the first thing. And then the second is how am I going to go to work with the kids at home?
Of course, once President Wilson announced we were in that war, well, I and every woman that I know ran out and joined up with the Red Cross. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be working with the Red Cross later today, and I have my uniform right here in my bag. Look at this. We all have a uniform, so we look alike, and they're nice and fresh looking and clean, and they come right over your normal clothing that you're wearing. They have a little insignia there and one on the arm, little pockets if you need to put something there. And of course, there's a little headpiece that goes on with it. It's very nice. Let's see, where did I put that? Well, I don't see. Oh, there it is. And it has that little red cross right in the front of your forehead. And we all wear that, so we look alike, and we look like we're all working for the same cause, which we are. We were rolling bandages, and I don't know how many socks I knitted. But as soon as we heard the word that our boys across in France were being devastated by that Spanish flu, we gave over all of our time to sew in masks to send over to the Spanish flu so that the boys could be safe. They were masks just like we've made for ourselves here, like this, you see? Nice white cotton masks, and they do the trick. There were thousands of these masks sent by Red Cross ladies all over the United States and from other countries as well. So we felt like we were doing a little bit, doing our part. Now, my daughter, Belle, and her husband, they also live in Leadville. And those little granddaughters of mine are just the light of my life. They are beautiful, perfect, happy little girls. So we tried to keep life as normal as we could. We didn't want things feeling out of place for those girls. But rules and regulations had been put in place by the city fathers that children under the age of 12 were not allowed to leave the house, and so on. So that was difficult, but in October, both of those beautiful little girls came down with that terrible flu. Well, of course, their house was quarantined right away, and neither Belle nor the girls could leave the house. You know, when you have the disease in your house, they come and they put up a big placard on the door that says there's disease in there and nobody's allowed in or out. So Edward, Edward, that's my husband, George, Belle's husband, he delivers mail up there in Leadville, and he had to keep going to work, but he couldn't go home, so he was staying with friends of his from the post office, and they were making do that way. So I couldn't go in and help Belle, but I could go over to the house. So I'd put on my coat and I'd go all the way across town and up the hill like you do to get to Belle's house, and I'd go get on the porch and I'd rap on the door and I'd holler out, "Belle, what can I bring for you? What can I get in town?" And she'd come and she'd holler at me from the other side of the door. She'd say, "Oh, Mother, I need flour," or whatever it was she needed. And so I'd say, "All right, I'll get it as quick as I can and I'll be back." And then I'd go off down the hill, sliding through that new snow that we had, you know, and I'd go to town, and there I'd go either to the mercantile or to the grocery, whatever she needed, and then I'd walk all the way back up the hill with what she needed. I'd go and I'd put it on the porch for her, and then I'd have to go and stand out in the yard while she opened the door. Well, she'd open the door and she'd bring it in, and then she'd stand in the doorway and we'd wave to one another and we'd blow kisses, and I couldn't touch her, and I couldn't touch my girls, and I couldn't help her. It was just so hard. But thank heaven, she and both those little girls came through it all right, and George was able to go back home to them. And my husband, Edward, he works in the mining business, but he does the amalgamation, you know. He supervises getting the ore out from the rock. He has a very important position, so he has to go to work, and he was doing that. But by now, we were all wearing the masks, and we were washing our hands more than I've ever washed my hands in my life, and we were avoiding our friends, you know. It just wasn't like it always has been, and you know, I have always kept a clean house. But by now, every woman that I know and we were cleaning to beat the band, and we were fumigating, and we're cleaning again. And I just couldn't risk Edward getting ill.
Supplies, and we had a little bit, but you know, we were in that same boat of, you know, I went to the liquor store and got some Everclear vodka to make hand sanitizer, and got some aloe vera stuff and used some essential oils. So we made a big batch of hand sanitizer for our family, and we did that for the refuge as well, so we would have a bunch extra on hand in case people needed it. So that was an adventure, because I went to the liquor store and I said, "Do you have," I can't remember what it was, 210 proof or whatever, and they just kind of looked at me funny and like, "Is this for drinking or?" And I said, "No, it's for making hand sanitizer." And the lady's like, "Okay, good. This is really not for drinking." So, so I had that experience, and yeah, it's been a real challenge too. And you know, just there's the regular stuff of family stress and relational dynamics, and COVID has just amplified all of that.
Overall, it's been kind of more of a challenge, but you know, one silver lining has been, my wife and I were talking, our girls, they have this like close sisterly relationship now, which was already kind of there before, but now they're like they're each other's playmates. You know, they're there every day with each other. And they've got this like really tight bond. They have their own little sort of imaginative world they're in every day. So that's been kind of like trying to look on the bright side. Like, well, that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. You know, they'd be apart at school, and then, you know, our younger would be at daycare this summer. So,
like I'm 32 years old, so I was like, I don't need masks. I don't need, and like as things kind of spiked, and you start hearing that people were getting sick again. And again, once people in the community started catching it, it made me realize, like, okay, I'm around my dad a lot. My dad's getting older in age. He doesn't have a compromised immune system, but still getting older. And so I wouldn't want to put his family or my family or anyone else's family in danger. And so once that reality kind of hit again, it's like, okay, like take a pause, don't think about yourself, but think about everybody else. So I'm a lot more cautious now, especially since I'm back in the office every day now. I'm definitely wearing masks now. I've got the 2 things of hand sanitizer in like the last like month and a half. So I'm definitely a lot more cautious.
So by now, the schools had been canceled. We weren't allowed to meet with our friends. You couldn't even go outside, out in the fresh air, and meet with more than 4 people at one time. There were no church services, can you imagine? And no more than 4 adults of the immediate family could go to any funeral. And by now there were so many funerals. You know that Obregon family next door to us, those good people? Father, mother, 5 children, all gone. In our church, there's a family, and they're all down with the flu. I think that the mother and the children are coming out of it, but they're not holding out much hope for the father, and that's going to be terrible because not only was he the provider for his family as it was, there's a new baby on the way. And that baby is going to come, flu or no. Well, you see here, I've been working on a new blanket for that baby's christening. It's not fancy, but it'll be fresh and it'll be something. We all have to do what we can. Now, down in Denver, they were running out of room in the hospitals for all of the sick people. And they had to go and use one of the fancy ballrooms in one of those big hotels as a makeshift hospital because they had nowhere else to put everybody. It's just the same as up here in Leadville, because that St. Vincent's Hospital, you know, the one that's run by those nice Catholic sisters, well, it was completely full up and there was no more room for all those poor suffering souls that needed a place. So the city fathers got together and they conscripted the Clarendon Hotel right there on Harrison Street, that main street in town. And they selected that one because it has heat, you know. And they said, we need someone to get that ready so that we can have that as a hospital. Well, there are women that follow the mining men, if you know what I mean. And I must admit, I had never been very charitable about those women, and I hadn't held them in very high regard. But do you know that those were the women that stepped up and did that work of getting that hotel ready, and then they went ahead and nursed the sick. Now, I would have volunteered for that, but how could I bring that disease home to Edward, you know? Those women, they worked so hard. They got that hotel ready in no time. And they had 16 rooms ready. And within 2 days of that opening, there were 51 people, sick people, being ministered to in there by those women. And a lot of those women lost their lives because of the work they did. Those poor souls didn't have a family to worry about, and so they sacrificed themselves. Now, that just goes to show that you never can tell how someone's life path is going to lead them in a certain direction. And you never can tell where you'll find the brightest stars, can you? I'm very sorry that I judged them so harshly. Well, by now, I and everyone I know in town was doing what they could. I would make meals and take them to places where people couldn't cook for themselves. And then there were people taking in laundry for other people, and men were going out and looking after the livestock for somebody that was down and out, and they were delivering firewood and coal, and people were even taking in the newly orphaned.
I was going up and down, but then I went way down at the end of May, and through June was a pretty dark time emotionally for me. And I was able to work on some medication and get more walking in and all of those types of things. But I think having the Bible study to work on and to do was a real help for me personally, but it was also a real gift to be able just to gather with women. And what we did is, because of COVID, we met outside in my backyard, and thankfully it's Colorado, so the weather was very nice every morning from 6:30 to 7:30, and we were able to enjoy some lovely sunrises and time together.
And the vaccine can't, I know, they're going to start with the most vulnerable people first. It has to be enough prolific vaccine that enough people can have it, that I feel like we're protected from the virus. And I don't want to fly on an airplane. I don't want to do any of that. And that's not like us. We're at the stage in our life where we've been doing a lot of traveling, and I'm glad I've gotten to places, before. Some people are calling 2020 like a year that didn't happen, or a year of loss or whatever, a blank year. I don't see it that way. It reminds me in some ways of the 60s and 70s, what you're talking about, the social injustice and the protests and what's turned into sometimes riots. That makes me very much think of those days.
When school does at some point hopefully resume and the kids are gone for the bulk of the day, 5 days a week, like that's gonna be really hard for them. I think it's gonna be hard for us too, but it's gonna be hard for them to just all of a sudden, because we've just been this like family unit of four, day in, day out, for months and months and months. And I think we've gotten to know each other better through that, and I think we've worked on sort of conflict management issues that never would have arisen otherwise. So hopefully, my hope is through sort of like the rose-tinted glasses of looking back on your life in 10 years, we'll think of this as kind of like, oh, it's actually kind of a unique opportunity as a family to have this time together. That's my hope. We'll forget about all the fights and like the awful stuff, and we'll just think, oh, look at all this time we had together. How fun is that?
One of the most distressing things was that we ran out of graves. Oh my goodness. By November, one of the mortuaries had 42 unburied souls that they had no room for. And the grieving families of those dearly departed, that they didn't have a place to bury them. Well, that was awful. Now, November is bad weather in Leadville under the normal conditions, but this was above and beyond. But now I'll tell you, you wouldn't think of a big mining company stepping up, would you? But they did. They said that if there were miners that would go out and dig through that snow and frozen ground and make graves, they would pay them as though they were working in the mines, and then they would save their jobs for them. That got us through that terrible problem. Now, there were druggists. They couldn't get what they needed. They couldn't even get castor oil, and a lot of people were thinking that would do the trick. And then there were people that couldn't get their fancy gargling solution that they were after. Well, our family has always used just plain salt water, but that's neither here nor there. But there were shysters that were out there that were hoping to make a profit off of this terrible situation, and they were doing things like peddling sugar cubes that had been soaked in kerosene and telling people to eat that, and nonsense like that. It was just shameful. And I'll tell you, more people than not just wanted the alcohol. Now, Leadville is a dry city, but there's always been a way for people with medicinal needs to get a special permit to have alcohol. And I don't know how this happened, but in November of last year, there were 2,000 of those permits issued. Now, I understand, although I don't hold with drinking, but special circumstances may cause for special things to be done. But 2,000 permits? That seems, well, that's the way it was. And there were special permits, more rules and regulations that were issued. And they were issuing more and more and more to keep people safe. But there were people that were saying, I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. I live in the United States. It's a free country, and they were just not caring about anybody but themselves. So the city fathers sent out a request for volunteers, and a lot of good men signed up. And those men were just employees then of the Board of Health, and they were given the full benefit of the law, and they could see to it that those regulations were enforced, and they did. And they could look out and they could see if there was a new outbreak in a certain part of town and report that, and they could see if somebody needed extra help, and they could see to it that they got that, and that was very good. Now, there are some people that are living way out by the smelter, you know, on the outskirts of town, and they're all Austrian people. And they don't speak English, and they were having a terrible time because all of the regulations and everything that were sent out to them were printed in English, and they couldn't read it. Well, that nice Mr. Zeitz, you know, that fixes the watches in town, he took it upon himself to go all the way out there and help them to understand what they needed to do to be safe. That was a wonderful thing. And the most important thing for me, prayer. That got us through a lot of the hard times, and it still is, you know. And it's not just the Methodists, mind you. We have a lovely synagogue in town, and there are some very nice Catholic people in town and people of other faiths. There are just prayers flying every which way out of Leadville, I'll tell you that. But I think it pays to be a little bit prayer. You know, Thanksgiving. Last Thanksgiving in November, it wasn't like it always is. Speaking of prayers, we always give prayers at Thanksgiving, but we have the whole family over, and I love to make a big dinner, but we couldn't do it. We couldn't be together like that. So last Thanksgiving, it was just me and Edward at the house, and we did manage to find things, as everybody did, to be thankful for, I think, because you have to look for joy in the darkest times, don't you? I think it's more possible to be healthy if you intend to be happy. So, now here we are. We've lost about 250 of our people in Leadville, and we're just hoping that soon this will come to an end. In December, it let up a little bit, and people the city father said, children, you can go out sledding as long as you don't go in groups, and people were out and waving across the street saying Merry Christmas, but it wasn't like it usually is. We couldn't go sing at the church. There was a little bit of a resurgence of the disease in January and a little bit more in February, but we're all just hoping and praying that this quarantine will be lifted soon. And I have to give credit to the mayor and to the city fathers and to all those volunteers that helped hold a line against that terrible disease, and also to the people of Leadville that all worked together to keep this from becoming a worse disaster. Now, we all have to keep our wits about us, you know, but I think we're a stronger community for having weathered this. Leadville,
Broomfield,
1919.
2020,
Influenza,
COVID-19,
fear, death, loss,
resilience, hope, love.
people working together, united.